The neuroscience of strength training is something that's always been very interesting to me. So today we're going to break down the study and talk about how strength training can actually modify our risk for things like dementia. If you want to follow along, the paper is Hippocampal Plasticity Underpins Long-Term Cognitive Gains from Resistance Exercise and Mild Cognitive Impairment. If you don't know what those terms mean, that's okay because we're going to break down what all of that means here in this video. The hippocampus is this little chunk of brain that sits right on the inside of a part of the brain called the temporal lobe. It's one of the most well-studied areas in all of neuroscience. In fact, a lot of our knowledge about neuroplasticity actually comes from studying the hippocampus. The hippocampus anatomically is tightly linked to our limbic system, which is heavily involved in our emotional regulation. It also gets a lot of fibers from the areas of the brain that are responsible for spatial awareness, like our vestibular system. Which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because a lot of our memories are based on where we were when an event happened and how we felt when that event happened. The study took the 101 people with mild cognitive impairment, which is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and they split them up into 4 groups, which combined progressive resistance training with some type of cognitive training, and they took shams of both groups, which meant a fake cognitive training and a fake exercise regimen, which is basically balance and stretching. After 6 months of training, there was a washout period where all the groups were just left to their own devices and there was no training involved, but they were monitored for 12 months. And basically they had MRIs, cognitive assessments, and fitness assessments. And they wanted to see who was going to progress towards dementia and who would actually have cognitive resilience. There are already multiple randomized controlled trials that show the benefit of resistance training for people with mild cognitive impairment. In fact, this same research group actually published a previous study that showed that resistance training outperformed cognitive training and had a better long-term improvement than cognitive training. But in this study, they looked at mechanisms, so something pretty unique happened. During the training, the strength training group had an expected improvement of an area of the brain called the posterior cingulate cortex, which is what the authors thought was responsible for the protection against dementia. However, that benefit actually started to decline once the training actually stopped. But when they stopped strength training, there was actually a progressive improvement in plasticity in the area of the hippocampus that we went over earlier, which is the area that we really do care about during the progression of Alzheimer's and dementia. And this effect lasted even though they had stopped strength training, and it wasn't tied to their level of activity or their fitness levels, because people that stopped being physically active and stopped training continued to have this protective benefit in the hippocampus. So yes, there are short-term and metabolic benefits that come with strength training, but we are just starting to touch the surface to how much plasticity actually changes for long periods of time from exercising with strength.